Most people grow up being told that debt is bad and that the goal is to eventually have none. That's reasonable when it comes to credit cards and personal loans. But if you look at how wealthy individuals and major institutions actually operate, they borrow large amounts of money on a regular basis, not because they're struggling, but because it benefits them financially. The difference isn't whether someone borrows, it's what they borrow for, and whether the return on that borrowing exceeds what it costs. Not all debt works the same way. There are two broad categories worth understanding. The first is debt that costs you money with no financial return. Credit card balances, high-interest personal loans used for everyday spending, car loans on vehicles that lose value the moment you drive them off the lot. You pay interest, the thing you bought doesn't generate income, and your net worth goes down. The second category is debt used to acquire something that generates a return greater than the interest rate on the loan. The asset pays for the debt and then produces something on top of it. That's the entire principle. Everything else in this video is an application of it. Leverage is the mechanism that makes this work at scale. Leverage just means using borrowed money to control a larger position than your own cash would allow. Here's a simple example. You have $50,000. You buy a $50,000 property outright with cash. The property increases in value by 10%. You made $5,000, a 10% return on your money. Now the same starting point with leverage. You use that $50,000 as a down payment on a $200,000 property. The property increases in value by 10%. It's now worth $220,000. You made $20,000 on a $50,000 investment. That's a 40% return on your actual cash. The borrowed money expanded what your capital could do. But leverage works in both directions. If that property drops 10% in value, you lose $20,000, which is 40% of your original cash. The borrowed money amplified the loss just as much as the gain. Risk scales with leverage, not just reward. Wealthy individuals use this principle through a few specific mechanisms. The most accessible one is real estate. A person buys a rental property with a mortgage, rents it out, and uses the rental income to cover the mortgage payment and operating costs. The tenant is effectively paying down the loan. Meanwhile, the property builds equity over time. The owner's cash is doing more than it could if the property were purchased outright or left in a savings account. The second is business debt. A business borrowing money at 7% interest to fund operations or expansion that generates a 20% return is using debt productively. The cost of the loan is lower than what the loan makes possible. That gap is profit. The third is something less accessible but worth understanding. Wealthy individuals sometimes borrow against assets they already own, stocks, real estate, a business, rather than selling them. Selling an asset triggers a taxable event. Borrowing against it does not. The asset continues to grow. The loan provides cash at a relatively low interest rate. This isn't a loophole. It's a structural feature of how the tax code is written. It's an advantage available at a certain level of wealth that most people can't directly use, but understanding why it exists helps explain why wealthy individuals often carry more debt than people expect. The same mechanism that makes productive debt work is what makes consumer debt destructive. A credit card at 22% APR used to buy clothing, groceries, or entertainment generates no financial return. The interest compounds, and there's nothing on the other side of it. A $3,000 balance at 22% costs roughly $660 per year in interest. That money leaves your net worth and produces nothing. Compare that to a mortgage at 7% on a property that appreciates over time and generates rental income. The cost of the debt is real in both cases. The difference is what exists on the other side of it. One produces something, the other doesn't. Most people cannot immediately access the same debt instruments that wealthy individuals use. That's worth saying directly. But there are realistic applications of this principle that are available to regular working Americans. A mortgage on a primary residence or an investment property is the most common and accessible form of productive debt. It builds equity, provides housing or rental income, and typically carries a lower interest rate than other loan types. Understanding the principle doesn't require replicating what a billionaire does. It requires being clear about what kind of debt you're carrying and what it's doing. Avoiding consumer debt isn't just about discipline. It's about recognizing that the cost of that debt is certain and the return is zero. That's not a moral position, it's just math. Student loans sit in the middle. They're debt used to acquire earning potential. Whether they function as productive debt depends entirely on one thing: the income increase the degree actually produces relative to the total cost of the loan. A degree that costs $80,000 and adds $25,000 per year to your earning power is a different calculation than one that costs $80,000 and produces minimal income growth. The debt is the same. The return is different. Small business debt follows the same logic. Borrowing capital at a rate lower than the expected return on that capital is the same principle at a smaller scale. The wrong takeaway from all of this is that borrowing more is the path to wealth. It isn't. The mechanism only works under two specific conditions. The return on what you borrow for has to exceed the cost of the debt. And you have to be able to service the loan without financial strain, meaning the payments can't put you in a position where one unexpected expense breaks the whole structure. Wealthy people use debt selectively. The debt they carry is connected to assets that generate income or grow in value. The debt most people carry is connected to things that do neither. Debt isn't inherently good or bad. It's a financial tool, and like any tool, it produces different outcomes depending on how it's used. The conditions under which it works in your favor are straightforward. The return has to exceed the cost, and the structure has to be manageable. The first useful step is looking at whatever debt you currently carry and being honest about what, if anything, is on the other side of it. If this helped clarify something, subscribe. We cover personal finance basics every week.